So my name is Suzanne Crane Miller, and I typically have the Tattoo Daughter logo and branding just because that is what my website is, and I tend to write under that name often. So today I want to talk to you about writing engaging dialogue. A little bit about me is I tend to write so that other people know they're not alone and try to take people to places that they wouldn't usually go and have people invited into their lives that they wouldn't usually meet. I've been writing and coaching for close to 15 years, and my day gig is managerial editing for scientific publishing, which I enjoy for the most part, but this time of year it is very hectic. But it really helps me be able to hone like my research skills and keeps my mind quick. So I'm thankful for a job that does that during the day. I am writing my 7th novel. I've written tons of short stories and received several awards for poetry. I also write memoir and have placed in contests for screenwriting. So I do a lot of different types of writing, but fiction, and especially like Southern Gothic fiction, I would say is my main focus currently. My 5th novel is due out with Inked in Gray in 2021, so I've been told. And I guess you would say I'm a bit like a Jodi Picoult meets Tarantino. Someone once compared me, so I liked that. I'll go with that. But then I wanted to start out, you can go to my blog and go to temperatures. So if you want to follow along there, you can, or you can just listen to me read it. And I'm also going to have slide clips of the dialogue parts we'll focus on. So either way that works for you. We pull down the driveway and there it is. One of those signs in the yard that tells me we're up for one hell of an afternoon. It's going to be a weird thing to have to walk by it on our way to bring her in. Seems like with what's gone on here, the sign would be the first thing to get thrown out. And I'm already wondering if they're inside thanking Jesus right now. Are they thanking him for the early summer heat? Maybe they're thanking him that the wife's beautician had a long wait yesterday morning, and that's what caused her to be in there 3 hours instead of 2. Not that 2 wouldn't have been bad enough. Don't matter. People with that kind of yard sign faith always find a way to be thankful, even when their lives are about as fucked up as they can get. That's why they got that sign, a reminder. Helps them keep it uppermost in their minds the Lord works in what they like to call mysterious ways, and that they got no choice but to thank him. You know, I hate these religious types, I tell Cobb right off before we even exit the car. He doesn't listen, just pulls open his door and gets out and starts walking up the sidewalk. We make it up on the porch and you can already hear a woman wailing and carrying on. Cobb's head hangs like a man knowing a fate he's met 100 times without it getting any easier. We had one of these last summer over in Lee County, and summer before that. Got me so I'm already dreading the end of spring every goddamn year now. It's got me so I'm looking in every backseat car window on my way to inside just about anywhere. I'll do the talking, he says. Hell, you ain't got to tell me twice, I tell him. After he knocks, we hear some scuffling around. Stop it now, I mean it, somebody shouts from behind the door, and then it opens. A short little lady peers out at us. Her face is all red, and she's got hot pink lipstick smeared to the side of her lips. Mitchum, she greets Cobb, nodding to him. Hey, Miss Flory, he says back, how you doing? She bites her bottom lip. The lipstick gets on the front of her teeth. Well, I'm sure you know how I am. Don't mean no disrespect, but ain't nobody doing good if they're opening the door to you. Something about the way she says this makes me snicker before I can help myself. Cobb elbows me. This here's my partner, Hogue, Cyrus Hogue. Cobb makes the introductions. She opens the door a crack wider, eyes me. Afternoon, ma'am, I say, real gentle-like. Can't say as I know him. Oh, well, he's new. Come over from Sanford a few months back, Cobb tells her. I wish he didn't feel the need to tell every damn soul that. Lee County ain't got the best reputation, and seems like people get to thinking that if you come from a place like Lee to Chatham, you're on the bottle, or you're a junkie of some kind. Nobody can imagine you just might be getting divorced and want to quit seeing your wife with her new boyfriend everywhere you go. We all three stand there, sweat beading on our foreheads, the humidity pressing on us. A small breeze flaps against the sign down in the yard, and it's gone before it can help cool us at all. I guess y'all better come on in, she finally says real soft, and I just about give her a hug because I'm so damn sticky out here. The entryway's still got those pine paneled walls. Those always creep me out. Ain't no good reason you can't paint those white. As soon as I walk in and look up, there it is, a portrait of the good Lord himself. One of those real old time ones with a plastic gold frame that you can just imagine hanging Norman Bates picking out to hang in his hotel right over the rocking chair he rocks in while he's wearing his mama's clothes. I let Cobb lead since he and this woman go back a ways. Soon as he saw the name on our dailies, he liked to bust out crying. Said he went to church with them and that he's known this family since he was a kid. He made sure to tell me they're good people. I told him our jails are full up with nothing but good people, because nobody starts out bad. Cell after cell of good people who got themselves in a bad way. We follow Miss Flory down a hallway. Feels like one of those fun houses, because the house looks real small from the outside, but this hallway seems like it don't end. We finally step into the kitchen. A woman setting up to the table with her head laid on it, her stomach still going in and out real quick from all her sobbing. Miss Flory walks over by her. Ray, Miss Flory coos real soft to her, rubbing her back slow. Ray, the officers are here. The woman shoots up wide-eyed like lightning, just shot clear through the roof and jolted her. Mommy, you let them in here. You let them inside. She starts hollering for all she's worth. Why, Mama, why? Miss Flory don't answer. She bends over, slips her arms in around her, pulling her close, whispering. And whatever it is, the woman calms, a horse easing into the rope. She helps Ray rise to her feet. They walk over to Cobb. You remember, Mitchum, y'all come up together over at the church, remember? And this is his partner, Mr. Hogue, ma'am. Hogue, I say. That's right, Mr. Hogue, and they just need you to come down to the station with them so they can get it all down and you can tell them about what happened. That's all, Miss Flory's coaxing. Wish we could take her with us when we got to bring in Jed again next week when he's drunk off his ass and tearing up Merle's bar. She might have a real good way with Jed, too. Cobb don't take out his cuffs. He offers Ray his arm, and I get it. Worst comes to worst, I'll chase her down if she bolts once we get outside. Kind of getting tired of him expecting me to be the one to give chase when it's called for, though. All on account of me being the one who actually goes to the gym. Seems like the more I work out, the more double cheeseburgers he feels free to eat. Ray links her shaky arm in his. I trail behind him down the hallway. Miss Flory's trailing me. I can hear her whispering her prayers the whole way. Lord, help my child. Lord, help her. Now you just keep your eyes on me, Ray, all right? Just right on me, Cobb instructs in that fatherly voice he has. Watching him walk along with this woman, small enough she looks like his own little girl there beside him, I wonder again, as I have throughout my time with him, how he ever got himself tied up in law enforcement. His tender heart can't have long left. My heart sure didn't. Started out tender and got harder within the first 6 months. Adaptation's what they call it. If we were any other species, since we're human, they call it toughening up, growing a pair. As he helps Ray walk down the front steps with him, an anger sets in. He's going on a decade now on this job and still got all that kind-heartedness intact. I ain't got no earthly idea what makes one man's goodness hold out longer than another. I'll be right behind you, Ray. I'm just getting my purse, Miss Flory calls, staying back a second. Our mournful procession makes it all the way down the sidewalk, passing the sign and headed towards our car. All of a sudden, Ray looks away from Cobb and at the parked car ahead of ours, and I catch sight of what she sees. There in the back seat of the passenger side is the car seat. I'd like to sucker punch the paramedic who didn't just take that fucking thing with him. Brandon, my Brandon, Ray screams, throwing herself against the car, beating on the window. My boy, Mama, I killed my boy. The front door flies open and Miss Flory rushes down the steps. Cobb moves over just in time for her to throw herself on her daughter, doing her best to calm her again. No, honey, no, come on now. It's just the vibe I get on how all this is going. I walk on down the driveway, pull out my phone and call 911. I try to talk as low as possible, giving him the address. Who's he calling? Hey, who are you calling? Ray yells at me, having raised up off the car in time to catch me. I pocket my phone and shake my head, hold up my hands like she's doing the arresting. Nobody, I lie. She's too quick for Miss Flory or Cobb. Jerking away from him, she does what I thought she was liable to do and takes off running for the backyard. I don't know why, but I give her a second, just like I used to with the kids on my street in elementary school. A head start because I knew I was the fastest. Before she rounds the side of the garage, I take off after her. And as we're running, I know what I always know. The one being chased has got the advantage because they know where they're going. My mind's racing, looking all around, trying to figure out where she's headed. Ain't a thing back there but some toys in the yard, a grill and a table and a field, and there it is, right on the grill. I see it a split second before she grabs it, a meat fork, a big old long one. She whirls around, I stop dead in my tracks. Part of me wants to bum rush her and just risk getting stabbed to get on with this fucking day. But looking in her eyes, I feel it, that tender part of me peering out from where I've buried it, and I put my hands out like I'm patting the air. He said I could bear it, but I can't. I can't, she shouts. My Brandon, it was so hot, so hot. Now, Ray, see, you don't know me, right? I tell her. She doesn't answer. And I don't know you. She just grips that fork tighter, holding it out higher. Ray, now, I say louder, we don't know each other. So I got no call to say anything about what you did or didn't do. You hear me? Me and Cobb, just the ones they send to pick you up. But that's why, she screams. They sent you because I did it. I left him in the car and he couldn't breathe. Then quick as she was yelling, she drops her arms down by her side. The fork now next to her thigh, dangling from her hand, she stands real still, her face all confused. How long you think it took him? How long? She asks. I hear steps coming behind me in the grass. I turn slightly. I give Cobb a look, letting him know I got this, then turn back to her. How long to what, Ray? I say. How long you think it took him to quit breathing? I take a deep breath, having no idea how I'm going to answer. There's no good thing to say. It's a lose-lose, and I hate those because I'm the winning type. And even though I remember my own mother telling me never act in hate and irritation, I do the wrong thing. I know it's wrong from the minute I start to do it, but it's going to get some traction one way or the other. I take a step forward. Soon as I do, Ray brings that fork up and uses the sharp part of its prongs to slice hard across one wrist, and then takes the fork with the other hand and jabs it into her other one. Cobb pushes me aside, runs over, knocks the fork out of her hand and onto the ground as Ray slips down the front of him, a rag doll he catches just before she hits the grass. I watch as he tears his collared shirt off, then his undershirt, using each one of her wrists, tying him tight. He hoists her up into his arms, carrying her through the yard, his bare gut hanging out from under her body, his pants barely staying up. She's just whimpering as they go. What do you want me to do? I call him. I don't give a damn what you do, he barks without turning around. By the time I walk around the front, he's loaded her up in the car. Miss Flory's in the back with her in her lap, and they're pulling out the driveway. I guess I'm walking. Before I go, I look over and I know I ain't making one more step without doing what I wanted to do the minute we pulled up. I stomp over and snatch up that thank you, Jesus sign. I thwack it against the bushes, tearing the shit out of it. I'm thanking him all right. Sigh? A voice interrupts. I turn, dropping the sign into the bushes. The ambulance had driven up without me hearing it, and here's Mike. Should have known this would be his time of day to respond. Hey, Mike, you called, right? He says. Yeah, we did, but Cobb took him on over to Beacon. It was quicker. We shoot the shit a few minutes, and he asks if I want to ride home. But I tell him I'll walk. I need the walk. I need to figure out why I did what I did, why I stepped forward when I needed to hang back. And if I knew the answer to that, I know I wouldn't have had to move here. I'd be back in Sanford with Laurel, and I'd still be on at the department over there. if I knew the answer to that, my whole life would be different. And I might just have turned out to be one of those people who was buying that sign instead of beating the shit out of it. That's just the first section of temperatures. And I wanted to use that to go through and kind of share with you and demonstrate how to write engaging dialogue. So if we use examples from that short, and you may want to reference it on the blog, but I have snippets clipped here. In that first part where he talks about, and it's the first time we actually hear him speak outside of his inner voice, and he says, you know, I hate these religious types. That actually serves to tell us kind of about him, and that he's not really a traditional type person for the South. Previously in that story, we get the gist that he's a Southern person from his dialect and what he's saying. But this establishes right off the bat that he's going into that situation in a bad mood. He sees the sign, he doesn't like it. So he wants to be sure and remind his partner. And we also get the gist that they know each other. These two men know each other because he expects that his partner knows that he doesn't like religious types. So then the next part sets up what I like to talk about with dialogue, that dialogue is often represented best with like a roller coaster of the climb and the rise and the exacerbating or increasing tension. And then dialogue can serve to decrease and dip down in that part of the roller coaster and create a calmer sense and create some brevity. So in the next part, where the older lady opens the door to them and he asks her how she's doing, and she says, well, I'm sure you know how I am. I don't mean no disrespect, but ain't nobody doing good if they're opening the door to you. That starts to ease the tension up, because we know that they're both aware they're not there for just serving, papers because someone's had too many speeding tickets. That whatever they're there for, it's not a pleasant visit. And it usually isn't when the police come. But even in this small town, this sets it up that she's not excited to see him, even though they've gone to church together. Then in this next part, where she says, well, I guess y'all better come in, the tension dips a little bit there, because she has resigned herself that even though she's not happy that they're there, she's going to let them in and they're going to go inside and visit. And then the next part, when the daughter is in the kitchen and she looks up and the tension goes back up because she's upset. Why did you let them in? Then in the part where she's praying, even that being added, where she's walking along after them praying in the hallway, that also lends itself to making sure we're keeping in the culture of what would people do who are in a religious Southern culture. And it establishes that the situation is getting worse. She knows it's bad enough. She's not even praying silently to herself anymore. She's praying out loud where they can hear her. Then in the next part, where he tells Ray, Cobb speaks to Ray and doesn't take out his handcuffs, but when he talks to her, he says, now you just keep your eyes on me, Ray, all right? This shows his tender side that the character Hogue was referencing, that he's been able to keep that tender side with being a cop. It shows us that he, is possibly more tender-hearted than Hogue is. So then in this part where the mother tells her that she's going to go get her purse, that was very purposeful in that it sort of shines a little light on that thing that we all do, right? That no matter the situation, no matter what bomb is falling, we might think to lock our front door. We do these little things, these little habits that we think are important, that really don't matter in the moment. But it gives us sort of a catharsis, and it's just something habitual that we do. So that's one reason that was included in there. And it kind of, sets it up for what's going to happen and provides an opportunity, which we'll talk about later. That dialogue is often a setup for the future event that's coming. Then this one where he says, where they get in the backyard and Hogue has chased Ray, she broke and went to the backyard. Then she's saying to him, he said, I can bear it, but I can't. And he thinks at that time that she's talking about God, and that phrase of everybody you know, who is religious knows that phrase about God won't give you any more than you can bear. But later, actually in the story, this is an important setup because we know as the reader that she wasn't talking about God at all. She ends up talking about an accomplice later on in the story. So I'm always, when I'm thinking about dialogue, I'm often writing in preparation for the future story. And I'm giving the reader clues that the characters in the story mistake and they don't know anything about. But it kind of gives the reader an edge. And later the reader can go back and be like, oh, I remember that clue. So that's an important part. Now, when he's saying to her, you know, Ray, see, you don't know me and I don't know you, right? He's trying to do the roller coaster again of taking it back down and decreasing the tension and trying to distract her and pull out a little bit of that tenderness he thinks he's forgotten. Then she says to him, how long do you think it took him to quit breathing? This phrase is kind of like a bullet because he's just thought that he's decreased the tension, but he realizes she's still perseverating on it and that he is not getting anything accomplished. And it's a horrifying, awful question that he doesn't want to answer, and he knows would make it worse if he does or doesn't answer. So this one, though she's a little bit decreasing the tension in some ways, yet also increasing it just by what the question is. And then down further, where she finally has done something to herself and Cobb had to rush in and try to save her, when Hogue asks him, what do you want me to do? I call to him, I don't give a damn what you do. That's an important part because that shows you that he and Hogue are not really allies. They're not on the same side, that when something happens, they'll turn on each other. And it also is the first time that Cobb seems pretty like a pit bull to us and pretty staunch, like he's not just weak. And so that's an important part in the story as well. Then at the end, let's see, where he's talking to the ambulance driver, and the ambulance driver shows up and they just have this little exchange and he says, oh, he went ahead and took him over to Beacon. That was important to include that and not just tell an ambulance driver came and showed up. It was important to have that little just menial dialogue like, you called us, yes, but this happened, because it's just the logistics and it kind of brings the tension down again and sort of pulling the roller coaster into the dock. That now the only tension remaining is really inside the narrator, and that's pretty consistent throughout. So that was important to include as well. So hopefully that gave you some indication about some examples of engaging dialogue. If you notice as well in the story, and maybe even take some time and reread it, there were specific decisions I made about when someone's going to talk and when the narrator is just going to be telling the story. And I try not to have long segments of dialogue if I can help it. I try to make it pack a punch, make it move the story forward. Those are some key things to remember. What is engaging dialogue all about? How can we do that and write engaging dialogue that way? One of the first things to consider is subtext. What is engaging dialogue all about? Subtext is an underlying, and I love this picture here from a Chris Van Allsburg book with the rug and the image of something's under the rug and the guy's trying to get it. What is underlying and what is being said but not actually said? And oftentimes characters want to be able to say something but have the retreating point of, if another, and we do this as human beings, right? If another character or another person misunderstands what we say, we could turn it one of two ways and, oh, I didn't mean it that way. You know, it's kind of the way you took it. So subtext is very important. What is being said, but not actually said? To create subtext, we have to think about, what does your character bring into that situation? Do they know the other character already? Have they had any interactions with them before? If they're a stranger, how do they engage with strangers? Are they standoffish? Are they to the point? Are they more direct? Do they treat people better if they know them already, or do they treat people worse? These are all things we have to consider when thinking about what does our character bring into the room or into the situation. And this actually lends itself to kind of context, but also, which we'll get to, but also is very much about scene. We have to create a scene that is ripe for dialogue. With the story excerpt I shared with you, that automatically creates a scene that's very ripe for dialogue. We're wondering at first, why are the police there? We gradually start to learn she had locked her child in the car. It brings a lot of tension to the situation that we're wondering about. How could this go? What could happen? And it's just a simple sort of everyday scene for two cops showing up for part of their job. It's not anything elaborate. So a scene doesn't have to be huge, bombs going off, people shooting each other. It can be quiet and yet still carry a lot of the same hugeness about it. So we're thinking about what situation can we put them in that either lends itself to tension and also can lend itself to decreasing the tension. If someone's going to just meet up to talk to someone and tell them they're breaking up, for instance, do they have to do it at their usual restaurant? Could they possibly get stalled on the side of the road riding in the car together in a scary, gravel road they're not used to, and they're having to wait to put the tire on? And it sort of creates more of a tension, and they then end up telling the other person they're breaking up with them. We want to think about how can we put the characters in a scene that will make the dialogue even better. Another thing to consider besides subtext is context. What past do they have? What culture are they surrounded by? You can think about so many different things with context. Politics, religion, time period is huge. What time period they're in may determine what words they use or don't use. It may, especially when you're thinking about gender, it may determine if women are outspoken or they're not, and they more sort of stay to themselves and speak when spoken to. Context also determines if you use common idioms. What are those common idioms as well? I often, when I think about idioms, I think about when I taught third grade. I told a little boy one time who was racing around the room, Daniel, quit running around like a chicken with your head cut off. And he looked at me and got very teary. And he said, why would the chicken have its head cut off? And I realized that was a horrible idiom to use in that context. So that, is something to think about with whether or not you're going to use idioms. And also very much too, thinking about the taboos of that time and that context. There are different taboos up north that we don't necessarily have in the South, and vice versa, or on the West Coast versus East Coast in another country. They have different taboos that we don't have. So, and givens and norms. What is a given to people? What do they commonly understand? What is a norm that everyone understands in that environment that they can mention in your dialogue? So context is huge as well. It's also important to think about history, what past characters have, as I mentioned before, and how long have they known each other? Do they, have they had good experiences with each other? Have they gone through traumas with each other? And then also to think about what future are you planning on them having? Maybe right now they're just meeting, but maybe by the end they will be inextricably intertwined, and you have to gradually build that with dialogue as well. So sometimes I noted there that this has to be woven in a little more with the next draft. So sometimes that's really hard to do in your first draft because you're not sure of all the ways they'll be woven together in the future. So you go back and do that a little bit more. What's tricky about that, and what's always hard, is if you have something that you then have to go tie in several chapters, but that's part of editing. So to sort of go over what we've done so far, thinking about subtext, that's very important. Thinking about context, and then the history the characters have together, and what future are they going to have, if any. Then with thinking about outlining of the future, that can be a way to be able to meet those expectations a little bit more with your first draft. and I'll actually cover that in a panel I'm going to be in with Right Hive about outlining. So I'm not going to do too much with this, but this is just a little outline with the story of temperatures. It's the first time I've ever done a story this way, actually. I chose a thematic theme with the theme of temperatures, and I'm using all words for the beginning of my chapter that had to do with temperatures or weather. So I went through and I just did a vague, brief outline of what each of those chapters is going to be about. And that does inform my dialogue as I'm the first draft, because I'm thinking about, okay, in the thunderstorms chapter, Cyrus is going to be saying this to his ex-wife. How's that going to affect in the misting chapter? What happens there? And so for me, now, mind you, this is not my first book I've written. I think when I wrote my first book, I did not do anything like this. This would be a little more probably further along in your writing process, but it does help me think about the future. Some of these things may change. I may not stick to all of these, but it still helps me write my first draft. A lot of people wonder, how do you up your game in dialogue? Well, there are some ways to do that. Would I say some people might have a little bit more natural ability with writing dialogue? Possibly. I definitely think for me, taking screenwriting courses helped me a ton. And we'll cover that a little bit more later with studying movies. But there's several ways to up your dialogue game. One thing that sort of started this whole story for me was I read an article in Rolling Stone about detectives. And I was pretty amazed at how archaic a lot of their methods still were, especially like in this article, they talked about how many of the housing projects in New York do not have cameras where they can see what people are doing. So they still had to go door to door to talk to people. And that kind of got my mind rolling for my next story. I knew I wanted my next story to be about sort of what happens when we don't admit things we've done in the past and how those sort of catch up with us. But the context I wanted to put that in was found for me by reading this article, and that I wanted to have a detective story. I also am a big fan of detective stories. I read a lot of them, and I love True Detectives. I've watched all of True Detectives, and I've read the novel that the writer of True Detectives wrote. So I'd kind of probably shied away from writing a detective book. But when I read this article, I thought I could do it differently if I set it in my area more. And then how was I going to take something that was the same? We've all seen a lot of detective stories. How was I going to make it different? So that really helped me with reading articles. That is one way to up your dialogue game, is just be constantly taking in information, whether it be a blog, short article snippets. I do subscribe to Apple News, and I go through probably about 10 or 15 minutes a day. And this also actually helps me with my job because I look at science articles, but I look at other articles too and see exposés. And I'm always reading, kind of intaking information that's different than my own experience. If you're only writing dialogue from your own experiences and thinking about what you would say, you're always going to have the same types of dialogue. So you want to try to stretch yourself and get into other people's experiences. This was an interesting quote that I thought in the Homicide Squad. With all the advances, forensics and police science and computers, I think it makes it easier investigating cases, says Detective Thomas Hanley, a 27-year veteran. But there's tools like interrogations and talking to people, a kid on the street, that come with time. Everything works on trust in these investigations. That really struck me. His quote from the article really struck me as, would that be something I'd want to write in my own way and use it as part of dialogue for a story? Is that something one of my detectives thinks, and maybe the other younger one doesn't think that and thinks he's sort of old school? So even reading this dialogue of this person who was interviewed was helpful to me. Another thing that you can also do to up your dialogue game, these are two separate pictures. So you see on the right is Cobb, and I even wrote it in a different color to kind of keep it separate for me. And on the left is Cyrus Hogue. And so I journal and make snippets of memories from characters. And a lot of times I end up getting dialogue from those journal entries, but I don't use the whole entry. And you can kind of see Cyrus, when I'm going to read for you Cyrus and Hogs, and you can kind of see the distinct difference between the two characters. So exploratory journaling is what I call this. This is Cyrus's excerpt. Some people said I was out of line about how I handled things with Janine's fella, but I can't pinpoint if she took up with him before we split. She swore she didn't. Couldn't find any evidence to the contrary. She said that's what my life's about, collecting evidence, that I don't know any other way to live. She's probably right, but it's what makes me pretty damn good at what I do. About made up my mind you can't be good at what you do and loving who you're doing. Tried, can't. Maybe I'll try again sometime later. Mama called me a lot after Jolie first left. Dad didn't care much one way or the other. He never liked Jolie. Hell, he never liked me much either. Only time I ever saw his face light up over me entering a room. And then I also catch when I am journaling there, he switched and he messed up her name. He should have, Jolie is his ex-wife's name. But he's talking about kind of a past with them that I probably won't include in the story. But this gets me into the history part about the sections I will include with his ex-wife. What is their history? What does he bring to the table? Then Cobb's is a little bit different. Some of the guys that say they wouldn't have picked this line of work if they had to do it over again. I differ with them on that. I knew what I was getting into. Didn't come from a blue blood family or nothing, but I grew up over Highway 1, not far from that exit turn off the Starlight Motel. And I saw my fair share of the law coming and going. This one officer seemed like it fell to him to take most of the calls in our part of town. Dean, Officer Dean, seemed pretty wet behind the ears, as my daddy used to say. Probably not a year or two out of the academy up in Raleigh. Tried his best to talk to people. Didn't run in gun drawn. Now you can kind of see there the two different mentalities of the cops. This one on the left was Cyrus. He's about collecting evidence, proving things. He's a little more hardened. This one on the right, he has a fond memory and he's nostalgic. Cobb is nostalgic about the officer that was in their neighborhood. And that was kind of an example to him of someone he could be. So that I highly encourage people to do exploratory journaling, where you're just sitting down, getting your head in the character's space. And another great way to be able to do that when COVID is subsided and vaccines are more widespread is to take an improv class. I did some acting classes in college, and those were some of my best college classes. And I loved doing theater. And improv classes really help you get in a different headspace and become someone else when you need to. I also, this has gotten me some funny looks when I'm on walks, but when I'm out on my hikes and nature walks, I walk along and sometimes even use my voice app and talk into my notes app and then email it to myself. But I walk along and I talk like I'm the character and I'm talking to myself and doing this inner dialogue as if I am that character or one of my other characters on the side, and really just become them. So that's another idea as well to up your dialogue game. And then these are other ways to develop yourself. Keep your dialogue and things you should keep in mind when you're writing dialogue. Say the dialogue out loud. Reading it out loud is extremely helpful. My husband's really great about letting me read all my stuff to him out loud, and that helps me a lot because something can make sense to you or seem funny to you or exciting to you, and you sort of get the reaction of someone else. I also used to, before COVID, I went to open mics and would try things out on an audience and see how they reacted and if I got the reaction I wanted. So that's helpful. Keep your dialogue brief and impactful. What is the purpose of the dialogue? It cannot be filler. Whatever the purpose is, it cannot be filler. It must be moving the story in some way, showing us something about a character, moving the story forward. Give each character a unique voice. Are there things that that character always tends to say? Especially, that is important to note your context and your cultural backgrounds. There are things that people do or repeat when they talk and different ways of talking that they have. common phrases again, like we talked about. So it's giving your character a unique voice, and add world appropriate slang, right? You don't want to use words that are way back, that are possibly too trendy, that wouldn't be applicable next year. Be consistent with the characters' voices. So make sure, and that, I think that's often done more when you do your second and third draft, is after you just get that first draft out, making sure that each character is consistent with what they've said and their voice and their thoughts about things and how they perceive things. And exploratory journaling really helps with that, because you have to know how they perceive things to be able to keep their voice. Avoid long dialogue paragraphs. Yes, if there's a shorter way that you can just provide a snippet of it, then tell more about that, and make sure what dialogue you include is just really meant to be there to pack a punch. Show who your character is. So we really got a picture in that first story I shared with you right off the bat when Hogue says, I hate these religious types. We get a pretty good glimpse of how he is. He seems to be jaded a bit. He seems to be not necessarily out for like the good of the person he's going to handle. He's angsty. So there's a lot of things that says about him. So show who your character is through what they're saying. I provided a good example over here, ways to develop to help yourself develop dialogue, staying in character. Like I was talking to you about taking the walks and talking into your notes app. Staying in character at times is a great way to do this. And I read an article, I love the movie Little Things with Denzel Washington and Jared Leto. And Jared Leto was up for the Best Actor Golden Globe Award for supporting actor recently for this movie. I highly recommend it. And I read an article that said that Denzel and Jared never met. The whole time they filmed this, that Jared Leto's method is to stay in character. So because he was the criminal and Denzel was the cop, they would not have usually met. They did not meet, they just had scenes together. And Denzel never met him out of character during the whole time making that film. And I think, of course, we can't do that the whole time we're writing a book. But I think that's important when you do sit down to write, is to get in character. And that's why I highly recommend improv classes and studying and reading some screenwriting books and really watching films as well as reading books, because it helps you get in character. Another way, many ways to up your dialogue game, but these are several ways: podcasts, TED Talks, self-help books, psychology books, YouTube, and just books in general. Olive Kitteridge is a fiction book, a huge favorite of mine. I try to reread it almost annually because Elizabeth Strout, she won the Pulitzer for that, and her dialogue is just really well placed and never to just be filler. It's always got an important part in the story. Another thing is the podcast. I put Ear Hustle. It is a podcast that is produced by inmates at a prison in California, and it gives you a lot of great perspectives about their lives, what it's like being an inmate, and just their lives growing up, what led them to that point in their life. When I'm getting ready to write about a certain topic, I do read certain books to research, like for instance, Tribe by Sebastian Unger. I also read his book War, where he went and lived with soldiers. When I wrote my second novel, Wage, that was going to be from the perspective of a soldier, I interviewed a soldier who had been in the Iraq War. And then I also read books by Sebastian Unger, who was a reporter that went to the Iraq War. So I highly recommend interviews as well, and talking with other people if you're able to get those. And in fact, I might add that one in there. That is a great one. Make this a little interactive adding there. But I think too, to always keep in mind, now, if you're not able to interview someone, YouTube is a great resource. These are some pictures from Soft White Underbelly. That's a YouTube channel I follow by a photographer who goes now and interviews people in Appalachia, also on Skid Row, and talks to them about their lives and whatever they want to talk about. And he films it in a very artistic way. And what's amazing to me is, with such diverse people that he interviews, the commonalities you see amongst them all. whether it's what happened in their childhood, different traumas they went through, different decisions they made, different struggles they have. So that helps you also in your dialogue game and getting into your character's head to be able to inundate yourself with these other resources. So dialogue and sort of reviewing should move a story forward, show us something about the character, give us clues as to events coming or insights into their past. And then another thing I kind of want to end with in a way is to show you that I loved this quote that Stephen Curry, the basketball player, said. "I know how powerful storytelling can be," he says. "One story can reach and impact so many people. I also know that I have a unique opportunity to reach a wide audience, and I want to leverage that to inspire and move people. Stories are about connection. They have the ability to transcend generations, engage us through emotions, and connect us to others." So that's a hugely important thing for me when I'm thinking about writing dialogue. Is it engaging the characters? Is it then connecting those characters to the reader somehow? So that's something to really keep in mind with engaging dialogue. Another thing I wanted to share with you really quick before I end up is, of course, always like I look through magazines and bookmark dialogue. This was an article from the women issue of National Geographic. And I've actually never written about a female soldier, but this quote I found highly interesting and made me kind of jot down some thoughts for a future story. "So women now in the service can find themselves in combat because battlefield is nonlinear," says Marine Lieutenant Colonel Misty Posey. "If you're in admin, if you're supply, you could end up in combat, and they all know that." So that's interesting. I didn't actually know that about women signing up for the Army now, that they have to know that no matter what position they're in, they could be in combat. And this could further give you ideas for a story that could happen to. So what happens then if someone in supply who's just been filling orders has to suddenly go into combat? And what would that be like for that soldier? So that could be a whole story in and of itself. Another one, for work, I end up reading Scientific American a lot. And this was an interesting article about surviving stress in the pandemic. So a doctor says, "I always tell my patients it's totally normal that the anxiety is there. It's about managing it. You can feel scared and fearful and angry and resentful simultaneously, be a victor and be resilient. Reminding people they are both versus either or is extremely important." That's so powerful even when thinking about characters, and their dialogue comes from that, because no one is a hero and a villain all the time. We're intermingled, we're those things at any given time, we're different things. So our dialogue has to come from those places, and yet the trick is keeping our dialogue authentic to who we are at heart, even though we still can be a myriad of different things. So there are certain rivers that always run in the current of our characters, and we have to keep our dialogue true to that, but also be able to give them things they say in a variety of circumstances. So that quote to me really spoke to that. So I encourage you to not limit yourself to just you sitting down trying to think of what would these characters say, to use some of these resources I've mentioned, to use some of this process, and to also be thinking about that picture. I'll leave you very much with those last two. I think I put them both on one page there with the pictures of the roller coaster. And when you go into a scene with your dialogue, thinking about how am I rising and making the tension climb, and then how am I having this character say something that's bringing it down, and having a good flow of that. So in wrapping up, those are the main things I would want you to remember about writing engaging dialogue. And I appreciate you coming and hanging out with me today and looking at some of these things. And I hope you'll check me out on Tattooed Daughter at wordpress.com. And I'll be glad if you would like to email me too. I always answer questions or anything like that. So I hope you enjoy Write Hive, and thanks a lot.